While Samsung and Apple were busy making shiny flagships back in 2015, Sony were busy making these three: the Z5, the Z5 Premium, and the Z5 Compact. Today we'll be taking a look at the baby Z5, a phone that I've been meaning to get my hands on ever since its launch, and if you've been around for a few thousand subs, you'll probably know why. Hey guys, my name's Ryan Thomas, and yes, I'm finally reviewing a Sony phone again. Before even picking up this device, the first thing you'll notice is probably the most vibrant colour you've ever seen. It reminds me of the 5C's colour, but somehow even more crazy. I love the look of this phone. I mean, for sure it's not smooth or shiny or curvy, but it's that audacious nature of the styling that makes it refreshing and stand out in a crop of such boringly samey handsets. It's got squared off edges without feeling poor in the hand, as well as a shiny metal rear housing, plastic side rails, and a minimalist and utilitarian set of exterior features. Stereo front firing speakers are present, as is the fingerprint scanner conveniently placed on the side where righties' thumbs naturally sit, a two-stage camera shutter button, small volume rocker, IP68 water and dust resistance, and a micro SD card slot. Naturally, there's a headphone port for those of you who like to use wired headphones, but of course we've got micro USB because this is the age of micro USB. I've recently got accustomed to using Type-C, so going back to micro B is a little bit poor, but it's there, and we kind of have to deal with that. Realistically, it makes no functional difference to the device. The slots are kept under this flap, which admittedly is a bit strange to see on a phone in the wild in 2019, but I kind of like this quirky nature. It makes it easy to swap cards out without a tool, even if it does look a tad ancient. Ergonomically, I love the fact that this phone is so easy to hold and use, being so small that it fits in the display area of most 2019 phones. Typing is probably my only concern, since my clumsy thumbs can barely maneuver a normal size phone keyboard at the best of times. Of course, a lot of this is the result of a tiny screen, sporting a 4.6-inch 720p IPS display. The statistics don't favour the device on paper, and this thing falls in so many categories, but it's only when you use the phone that you realise that Sony made a really smart move here, opting for a lower resolution. 1080p would have undoubtedly be wasted on a screen of this size, and 720p not only means the performance is better because you have to push fewer pixels, but also it improves on battery life because of this. The display itself is decent in my opinion and more than usable in 2019, apart from one issue that I encountered from day one: the brightness. This has to be one of the dimmest displays I've ever used on any device. It's so dark that it can even be an eye strain when used inside, making outdoor use impossible in my opinion for anything other than overcast, and who'd have thought that of all the specs, this was the one to fall on the Sony Z5C. Aside from the main brightness problem, the screen is actually really good, which is a bit of a shame. Text is sharp enough to read, colours are accurate, viewing angles are tremendous, and the responsiveness surprised me in how quick it is, but it's also got to come back to that dimness problem, and that's something I just can't brush off. Yes, the bezels are pretty big, and the screen to body ratio is pretty low, but I really don't care about that. And I'm not one of these people who's going for the minimal design on every single smartphone. I kind of like bezels, and when they're used like this one with stereo front firing speakers, it can make for a good experience. Performance is a controversial topic in this era of smartphone because right on the spec sheet there's an issue: the infamous Snapdragon 810 from Qualcomm. The chip is known for ruthless overheating, thermal throttling, and battery draining due to its poor engineering. Combine that with the just 2 GB of RAM and you're left with something that, again, on paper looks pretty poor. In actuality, everyday performance is quite good. Not snappy by any means, and the occasional lag is to be expected, but it's not as bad as I was remembering 810s being. Switching between applications and other multitasking is pretty good, however don't expect a lot of apps to be stored in RAM, as we only have a third of what's standard on smartphones these days. And on the gaming front, it also surprised me. Like, yes, the Snapdragon 810 is known to be a pretty bad chip, but it handled a lot of 3D titles pretty well. Okay, these weren't Fortnite or PUBG or any of the really high-end stuff, but some racers actually tend to work on this thing just fine with no lag whatsoever. I'd have to put this down to the fact that it is a 720p screen, and I'm pretty sure most users of the smartphone will use 2D games as opposed to 3D games, because realistically, you're not buying a 4.6-inch screen device to play games. Another issue that I encountered that wasn't really much of an issue for me personally was the fact that this phone gets quite warm. Yes, the Snapdragon 810 does get hot, but that kind of reflects in the chassis, and the whole phone can get quite warm, which is, I guess, not the greatest, but not bad if, like me, you live in one of the cooler parts of the world, because it can act like a bit of a hand warmer. The ergonomic fingerprint scanner feels good as long as you don't have massive hands, and the fact that you have to press the button first is a shame, but the speed is pretty decent, and I didn't find myself having to input my PIN as much as I thought I would, due to phones of this era sporting pretty finicky scanners. 4G and Wi-Fi AC performance is very good, giving me just shy of the speeds that I'd expect from a newer model, with no dropouts and a consistent connection, something that you can't exactly take for granted on phones of this price. The Android 7.1.2 software isn't great, it's far from perfect, and of course it's definitely not up to date, but it's one of those things where it's just functional and it works, and it seems to just like not lag, which is something that I was expecting from this Sony phone. The bloat is something to worry about on these older phones, and this has some of that, but the background processors must be pretty minimal because I found basically no slowdown. Of course, it's not going to have the latest features or the latest security patches, meaning that you are going to have to worry about those things, but you can go and get custom software if you really want to, and I found the 7.1.2 software on here to be just fine. In fact, I'd have to say the software is probably one of the better parts of the smartphone, which leads us pretty smoothly onto battery life, something that isn't quite as surprisingly good as everything else. We're treated to a 4-year-old 2700 mAh battery here, which was pretty average in its day, but after nearly half a decade of degradation, it isn't getting many people through a full day. I found that standby time was pretty awful, and you'd certainly need to charge it at lunchtime, which isn't painfully slow thanks to the use of Quick Charge 2.0, but not super fast by any means, and you don't get wireless charging either due to that use of a metal back. Swiftly moving on to cameras now, we have some pretty good shooters on paper. We've got 23 megapixels on the rear and 5.1 megapixels on the front. That's definitely not a bad setup, but in practice, it turned out to be a pretty bad camera. Now, there are separate modes for the 4K or UHD and Full HD video, which really kind of weirded me out a bit because they're different modes just to change resolutions. And when it comes to actually taking photos and videos, they didn't come out as well as I thought they would. They lacked a lot in dynamic range, focus was pretty hard to get even using the touch controls, and yes, that 2-stage shutter button is pretty good, but it's kind of useless if the camera isn't very good. Don't get me wrong, in good light you can get some decent photos, but it's 23 megapixels, which seems like a really good spec. But you end up getting a lot of grain, and in low light you don't tend to get the best quality ever. It's one of those cameras that just looks good on paper and not in real life. It really shows that you don't need a lot of megapixels to get a good camera sensor. And that leads us all to the question, should you still buy the Z5 Compact? Not really, although in its class, and it sits with the Galaxy S6, the Nexus 6P and the iPhone 6, I'd say it's one of the better ones of those, purely because it's more reliable, it's got better software, and it tends to kind of hold up better in 2019 compared to those, with fewer deficiencies and problems, but the whole kind of market in that kind of just sub £100, 80-ish pound sector is kind of blurry, and in my opinion, if you could just save just a few more pennies, you should get a Mi A2 Lite. Now I know I've been banging on about that phone ever since it came out, and I really like the Mi A2 Lite. However, it shows, just when you're comparing that to this, that there's so many improvements made in just the past few years in smartphones. As I alluded to at the start of this video, the Z5 Compact was a little beast when it first came out, and I really wanted to love it, but unfortunately due to that dim screen, that bad battery life, and probably most importantly, that poor camera, I just can't recommend it to anyone who wants anything better than just a middle ground phone, in between saving up for, let's say, the Galaxy S10. And with that, I'm going to end this video here. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do like, dislike, comment and subscribe if you're new around here to never miss a video like this one. Also check out social medias, and that all will be in the video description as always. I'm really sad that this wasn't the phone that I thought it was going to be, but nevertheless a great phone to hold on to for coming months. And hey, I might even put custom software on it. I want to give a massive shout out to my patrons, you guys are awesome. My name is Ryan Thomas, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.